Cases like this will make you become grateful that you do not know when or how you are going to die. Imagine the thought of, I am going to be executed in 3 days. For a prisoner, is it something to worry about? Isn't it an escape from the many years of prison tortures? Or maybe not. 2 men, 2 outrageous crimes, and 2 dates with death. Stay tuned as we look into the minds of Florida's most notorious death row inmates scheduled for execution this June. In June 2025, the state of Florida is set to do something it hasn't done since the early days of the year. Carry out not 1 but 2 executions, just weeks apart. These aren't ordinary names on a list. These are men whose actions have remained engraved in court records, victim memorials, and public memory for over 3 decades. Both convicted in the 1990s for crimes so disturbing that even the courts described their actions as dreadful and unnecessarily torturous. One of them abducted a young mother of 2 children on her way to pick them up from school. The other followed a fresh college graduate from a downtown nightclub into the shadows of Orlando's early morning silence. Their cases have resurfaced in the public eye as their execution dates approach. This story is not only about crime. It is about process. About how a system prepares to end a life that once ended another. We will look at the case files, the final appeals, the governor's signatures. We will also listen to the words of those who remember the victims, and even those spoken by the men themselves, from death row. Case 1. Thomas Lee Godinez. Thomas Godinez, who is currently 51 years old, was convicted for the 1994 rape and murder of Michelle McGrath in Orlando, Florida. Michelle McGrath was a 27-year-old girl who grew up in downtown Orlando. She attended Oak Ridge High School in Orlando, where she was her class's homecoming queen. She had just started working full-time and rented a small apartment. She worked during the day and spent weekends catching up with friends. Her friends described her as warm-hearted, curious, and grounded. She loved music, but not clubs. Although sometimes she went when her friends convinced her. That very night was one of those nights. A group text, a little pressure, and eventually she said yes. Across the same city, another 22-year-old lived a very different life. Thomas Lee Godinez was born in Michigan on February 27, 1974. He moved to Florida as a teenager. His background was more chaotic. A broken home. Run-ins with law enforcement before he turned 18. By his early 20s, police already knew his name. He was known for petty crimes, trespassing, drug possession, disorderly conduct. He was volatile, aggressive, and he had already been accused multiple times of making women feel unsafe. Those reports often didn't go far. Witnesses didn't want to press charges. Victims backed out. But the patterns were there. Short tempers, threats, violence just beneath the surface. He didn't have stable work. He floated between low-wage jobs and long stretches of nothing. No known long-term relationships. No close friends who stood up for his character in court later. To most people, Thomas Godinez was just another troubled young man on the edge. But on this day, he had already crossed it. It was Saturday night, May 21, 1994. Downtown Orlando was alive. Barbarella's nightclub pulsed with music, lights, and movement. Inside that club was 27-year-old Michelle McGrath. She had joined her friends for a night out. By 2:45 a.m., when the music faded and the crowd reduced, Michelle left the club, alone. As she walked out onto Pine Street, she headed toward her car, a red Geo Metro, parked just a few blocks away. Little did she know someone had been watching her. At nearly the same time, another woman, Rochelle Smith, was fighting off a terrifying encounter. She had just reached her car when a man tried to open her door. It wasn't her boyfriend who was saying goodbye to some friends. He shouted at her, smashed her window with his fist. She sped away shaken, but alive. Around 4 a.m., a man named Colbert Presley walked through the same lot. He noticed something strange. A set of car keys. Clothes, folded, dropped, or discarded. And Michelle's red Geo Metro. Empty. He called the police. Hours later that same morning, just before 7:30 a.m., her body was discovered by Jane Brand, a Pace School custodian in an alley behind Pace School in downtown Orlando. Michelle was lying on her back, her clothing was missing. Her bra had been pushed up above her chest. Her body showed signs of a brutal struggle. She had been beaten. Her head had been struck with extreme force and there were injuries to her hands, evidence that she had fought back. The medical examiner would later confirm trauma consistent with force and resistance. Her blood alcohol content was 0.17. She had been alive, aware, for most of what happened. The crime shocked Orlando. A young woman out with friends. A popular local venue. A sudden, brutal attack, within walking distance of homes, schools, and police patrol routes. The time of death was placed between 3 o'clock and 5 a.m. The exact hours after she left the club. Investigators returned to the scene at daylight and began piecing together witness statements, security footage, and reports from the club. Descriptions matched a suspect Orlando police already knew. They linked him to Rochelle Smith's earlier assault. They had eyewitnesses who saw him at Barbarella's. And then came a critical tip. Michelle's red Geo Metro had been spotted parked outside the Holiday Club apartments, where Thomas Godinez lived. A warrant was issued. Inside the apartment, police recovered clothing and other evidence. Later, lab analysis would confirm biological evidence consistent with the crime scene. No forced entry. No weapons found. Just a timeline that aligned too closely to be ignored. Michelle left the club and Godinez followed. He attempted to attack one woman, then succeeded with another. He brought her into an unlit alley beside a school. And left her there, alone, dead, and discarded. For days, the media circled the neighborhood. The alley behind Pace School was cordoned off. Locals brought flowers. And Michelle McGrath's photo began appearing in every paper, her smile frozen in time. Her sister Amy Liu said,
"She lit up the room. When she walked in the room, she just had this beautiful smile, and she had a laugh that was, everyone just loved to hear her laugh. And everyone was drawn towards her."
When arrested, Godinez gave no statement of regret. No explanation, no justification. Just silence. If you were Michelle's family, how would that make you feel? Will you seek a word of apology from him, or at this point it doesn't matter since he's been arrested? He was charged with first-degree murder, 2 counts of sexual assault, attempted sexual assault, and attempted burglary with assault. The trial was moved to Collier County due to pretrial publicity. In 1995, Judge Belvin Perry sentenced Godinez to death. Judge Belvin said, "The evidence quite clearly shows that the victim did not meet an easy, merciful, and painless death." After his conviction, Thomas Godinez was transferred to Florida State Prison in Rayford. He was placed on death row, where he has remained for over 30 years. He has maintained a blank conduct, rarely speaking about the events of May 1994. Experts have described him as having a flat affect, with limited emotional expression. These assessments have been consistent over the years. He follows routines, avoids conflicts, and keeps to himself. He has not participated in rehabilitation programs or sought counseling. His legal team has filed multiple appeals over the years, challenging various aspects of his trial and sentencing. However, these appeals have been unsuccessful, and his death sentence have been upheld. Now, after 30 years on death row, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed the death warrant in May 2025. Thomas Godinez is scheduled to be executed on June 24, 2025 at Florida State Prison in Rayford. When the victim's sister was asked how she feels now that Thomas's execution has been signed, she said,
Over the last 30 years, occasionally I do look at the status of if he's still where I thought he was, and I'm not going to have to do that anymore. And that is actually kind of a relief.
This brings us to the next man, whose execution is in the same manner as that of Thomas Godinez, but with a different and haunting crime. Anthony Wainwright. Anthony Floyd Wainwright, born October 22, 1970, was serving a sentence for burglary in North Carolina when he escaped from a minimum security prison in April 1994, along with fellow inmate Richard Hamilton. Their escape set off a chain of events that would result in an unforgivable crime in Florida. On April 27, 1994, Lake City, Florida. A young mother, a nursing student, and a routine trip to the grocery store. Carmen Gabriela Gayhart, born September 2, 1970, and was 23 years old, had just finished her classes at Lake City Community College. She was a dedicated student balancing her studies with the responsibilities of raising her two young children, a son and a daughter. That afternoon, Carmen stopped by the local Winn-Dixie supermarket to pick up some groceries. Her next stop was to be the daycare center where her children were waiting for her. As she loaded her purchases into her car, a Ford Bronco, in the parking lot, two men approached her. Yes, you guessed right. Anthony Floyd Wainwright and Richard Eugene Hamilton. Just days prior, Wainwright and Hamilton had escaped from a minimum security prison in Carteret County, North Carolina. Wainwright was serving a 10-year sentence for burglary, while Hamilton was serving 25 years for armed robbery. After their escape, they stole a green Cadillac and then burglarized a house where they stole firearms, embarking on a journey that would lead them to Florida. In Lake City, their stolen vehicle overheated. Seeking another means of transportation, they targeted Carmen as she was loading her groceries. At gunpoint, they forced her into her own vehicle and drove her to a remote wooded area in Hamilton County. There, Carmen was subjected to a brutal assault. She was raped, strangled, and shot twice in the back of the head with a .22 caliber rifle. Her body was discovered days later following a confession and map provided by Hamilton. The following day, Wainwright and Hamilton were apprehended in Mississippi after a shootout with law enforcement. They were extradited to Florida and stood trial at the Hamilton County Courthouse. Circuit Judge Elmer Vernon Douglas presided over the case. In 1995, both men were convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual battery, receiving death sentences. Carmen's family, devastated by the loss, attended the trial. Her sister described her as the sweetest girl on the face of the earth. A trust fund was established for Carmen's two children, ensuring their care in the wake of their mother's tragic death. As of now, Hamilton is already dead. He died of natural cause in 2023, while Anthony Wainwright has spent over 30 years behind bars, most of them in solitary confinement on Florida's death row. Since 1995, he has lived in a 6-by-9-foot concrete cell at Florida State Prison in Rayford. The light inside never truly turns off. Meals come through a slot in the door. Yard time, if allowed, happens in isolation. In the courtroom, during trial, he rarely made eye contact with jurors. He barely flinched when the verdict was read. And in the decades that followed, his behavior behind bars hasn't changed much. For years, prison guards and court observers have described Wainwright's behavior with one word: detached. Reports from within the prison say that Wainwright keeps to himself. No outbursts. No confessions. No apologies. In one documented interview, when asked if he remembered the moment Carmen Gayhart was killed, he paused for nearly 10 seconds, looked away, and responded with 5 words: "That's not what matters now." In another, when pressed on whether he had anything to say to Carmen's children, who are now adults, he replied only, quote, "They're better off not hearing from me." These replies have sparked criticism and outrage from the Gayhart family, who have waited over 30 years for a direct statement, a shred of remorse, or any recognition of what he did. Instead, Wainwright has remained mostly silent. His attorneys have focused primarily on legal technicalities. IQ levels, family trauma, and exposure to Agent Orange, through his father's military service, were all brought forward in post-conviction appeals. But from the man himself, the one person who could offer the truth of what happened that April afternoon, there's been silence. And that silence has come to define his final years. As of today, Anthony Wainwright's last appeal already failed and he has been executed by lethal injection on Tuesday, June 10, 2025. The execution began about 6:10 p.m. His shoulders reportedly shuddered a couple of times, while blinking his eyes and taking several deep breaths. He then became still at 6:14 p.m. Anthony Wainwright was pronounced dead at 6:22 p.m., according to Brian Griffin, a spokesman for Governor Ron DeSantis. He made a final statement, but the words were inaudible for witnesses to hear. 2 men. 2 crimes. 2 executions. Their names now sealed into Florida's death row history. For the families, this marks the end of a nightmare, and the beginning of something else. In death, there are no final words loud enough to undo what was done. But for those left behind, maybe now, they can finally sleep. This case leaves us with questions. Was justice served? Did the system wait too long or not long enough? What would you have done if you were in that courtroom? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already. And thank you for watching. The next case will haunt you bad. Watch out for it.